Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What are the landlocked developing countries doing to combat climate change, to reverse the AIDS epidemic, and to promote economic development? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're taking a look at what a group of countries, a very active group of countries at the United Nations, and a very important group is doing to deal with problems such as climate change, promote economic development, and many others. My guest today is an expert on this group and what they're doing. My guest today is Her Excellency, Dr. Mwaba Kasese-Bota, who is Zambia's Permanent Representative to the United Nations. Ambassador Mwaba Kasese-Bota is also the chairperson of the Landlocked Developing Countries Group. She's also the co-facilitator of a high-level AIDS meeting to be held in June of this year. Your Excellency, Kasese-Bota, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you very much for your good afternoon.
I appreciate you being with me today. We start off with that long tongue twister, landlocked developing countries. Let's talk about that for a moment. You are the chair of that group. How many landlocked developing countries are there in the world, and where? Don't name all of them, but most of them, I guess, are in Africa and Asia and probably a couple in Latin America. Is that correct?
Oh, yes, you are very correct, Bill. We have 32 countries that are collectively known as a group of landlocked developing countries due to the fact that we have lack of territorial access to seas, and we are all aware that the sea is where global trade takes place. And because of that remoteness to the global markets, we have serious challenges of development. And although we call ourselves landlocked, we have realized that we can turn that landlockedness into an opportunity by making ourselves land-linked. And it is something that we've been working on as a group of landlocked developing countries. Mm-hmm. We have 16 landlocked countries in Africa. 6 of them are in Southern Africa, where I come from. We have 10 in Asia, we have 4 in Eastern Europe, and 2 in Latin America. So these countries are found in all the regions of the global community.
Mm-hmm. Now, if we could just shine the spotlight on Zambia just for a moment or two. Zambia is a country of about 285,000 square miles, about 740,000 square kilometers. It's 1/10 larger than the state of Texas in the United States, a very large country. But we don't think about landlocked countries very often, especially people who live in countries that have coastlines, that access rivers or the ocean, shall we say. What are a couple of the challenges that you would have, say, in Zambia? I know you're near Mozambique, Angola, several countries touch Zambia, but what would be 2 or 3 of the challenges that you'd have in dealing with being landlocked?
The most important challenge we have is that of increased cost of production as landlocked countries, in the sense that some of the primary commodities that we import to add into finished product, and we will utilize some of our own primary commodities and add them up to add value and export. It makes it very expensive for countries like Zambia to actually compete globally in terms of the producers that are from our country. So for us to import goods from other countries, we have to pay 3-4 times the cost of our transit neighbors for one container to get to Zambia. And similarly, for us to export, it's the same thing, where again we have to pay the transportation costs being very high. Before, in the early 80s, 70s and 80s, Zambia was doing very well as a developing country. We had come from being classified as a middle-income country to move down to the least developing country, although at the moment we have moved up slightly to as a lower middle-income country. But we had quite a preponderance of industries within our region, within our country. But immediately our neighboring countries got their independence, we found that a number of industries were moving to our neighboring countries who were closer to the sea, where the global trade is actually taking place. So at some point, Zambia did deindustrialize. But of course, the government has prioritized diversification of our economy, including rapid industrialization. So that is something that we are now working on as a country. We also ensured that we got together with the other 32 landlocked developing countries who have a similar story as ours, and we pushed to have industrialization as a priority for the group of landlocked developing countries. We also realized that for us to industrialize, we needed to have energy as part of structural economic transformation. And the energy demands are huge for all countries because energy is inextricably linked to survival in any case anyway. Energy borders on the social, economic, and environmental survival of our planet. So we also we are trying to ensure that we build our sustainable energy reserves and ensure that we have energy that is going to sustain all the three pillars of our development aspirations. So that is the challenge that we had. Again, energy for Zambia has been predominantly hydro energy. And being a landlocked country, Zambia has not been spared by the climatic effects or by climatic changes effects. We have been having inefficient rainfalls over a period of time. Although this year the amount of rain has drastically reduced, so much that some places have actually got a drought. So because of the inefficient rainfall patterns that we've been having, our rivers have not been able to get the water that they used to have before. And the dams where we have the turbines for hydropower are not able to generate hydropower the way they were able to before. So we have had a significant reduction in the production of energy, which has impacted heavily on Zambia. And just like the case is in any difficult situations, you have opportunities. So we are now looking at diversifying from hydro energy, which is good because the hydro energy is also part of sustainable energy. We are looking at enhancing our solar energy production, as well as looking at other renewable sources of energy. And the government is working to ensure that we have other alternatives of energy instead of totally relying on hydro energy, as the case has been.
As you were describing the climate change in Zambia, and I have not read about any country on earth that has not had some adverse impact from climate change. It seems everybody, every country, in every part of the world has had some really negative impact. But when you were talking about that, I remember seeing an article in the New York Times just recently on the Kariba Dam in your country and how it was one of the largest dam projects in the world at one point, the hydroelectric power that was provided, and of course with that horrific drought that has taken place and the lack of rainfall, it's been a major impact. This, I'm assuming that the landlocked developing countries, when you met in Vienna just in 2014 for your second major conference, or when you get together to talk about this, I'm assuming climate change is one of the top priorities. Are there a couple of others that come up to the top? I know there are many that you've dealt with the Millennium Development Goals to reduce abject poverty, to promote universal primary school education, to empower women, those types of things. But are there two or three others that your group's focusing on?
Of the 32 countries that are landlocked globally, 15 of those are actually least developing countries. Mm-hmm. And when we are looking at the performance in the Millennium Declaration agenda and how these countries fared, most of those countries that belong to both least developing country and landlocked developing countries were actually at the bottom part of our performance in terms of getting the Millennium Development Agenda goals that we had all promised we are going to work on and improve. As much as the MDGs were draped in the social curtains, they also spoke to the economic and environmental pillars. But what the measurable targets were those of social nature. So we discovered that the landlocked developing countries were not spared by the social consequences of non-development. And because of that, the group of landlocked developing countries is an all-rounder group. It works on the social issues. We're also working on economic issues, and we're working on measures that are going to improve protection of our environment, as well as resilience of the environment. To that effect, the group of landlocked developing countries participated in the Paris Summit, and we have actually agreed to the Paris Agreement. We have all affirmed the Paris Agreement that we are going to commit to reducing hydrocarbons to the minimum, that is the 1.5 degrees Celsius per year, as well as endeavor to reduce poverty or eliminate extreme poverty from our people. When we looked at the performance of the landlocked countries in terms of the bigger macroeconomic picture, a number of our countries had quite an impressive GDP over the others. But further analysis showed that that GDP is basically due to extractive industry, because we're a primary exporter of primary commodities. For Zambia, it's the copper. For others, it's the oil. And we are not adding any value to our goods. So we have prioritized that value addition within the Vienna Program of Action for Landlocked Developing Countries. We also fought to have us linked within the 2030 agenda to value addition as well. So there's a lot that we are doing as a group of 32 countries that are landlocked. But we're also hoping that we are going to enhance our partnerships with our multilateral donors as well as the bilateral donors. In the case of energy, we are working very well. We have started off very well working with Sustainable Energy for All. We already have some plans where Sustainable Energy for All is working with a number of countries, including Zambia, to come up with some platform that we are going to sell as strategies for enhancing energy, sustainable energy for all. We are also trying to work with the South-South Cooperation Office to kickstart the climate change pilot programs, including those that are going to endeavor to push us and diversify our economies, including projects on agriculture. But this is again sustainable agriculture, which will be linked to value addition.
That is very important. You've mentioned several items. One is to diversify. It's very important to diversify the economy and not be dependent upon one extractive element, for example, oil or whatever the case might be. And of course, the second thing is to become clean energy sufficient at some point. And there are some countries now that are moving in that direction very quickly. And I think we could all learn from, I know Denmark is one that's moving very quickly. I think Costa Rica is also doing well. And so these are perhaps best practices for us as we move forward. But it sounds like you're doing some really exciting things to help deal with these problems. And of course, these are universal problems. These are climate change. It will not be dealt with by one country or one group or anything like that. We all have to work together on this. As you were talking about this, I was thinking about the old Millennium Development Goals and now the new Sustainable Development Goals, the 17 Sustainable Development Goals that will run from 2015 through 2030, the Development Agenda for 2030. And of course, these are building upon the Millennium Development Goals to a large degree. There was one in there that, well, they're all important, all are very important, but one is to empower women. How important is it to empower women in your countries and in every country around the world to help them to reach their full potential and to help deal with these problems that we were talking about today?
Thank you very much. It is a well-known fact that women constitute 50% of the global population. And also to give credit to the women, I think women are responsible for all of us being on earth. I think all of us are products of a woman, and we are happy that women are playing such a critical role to control the population. But at the same time, this critical group has been isolated from a lot of measures that could enhance their productivity. The women are sometimes not given the rights that they deserve, the right to own themselves, the right to own their bodies, the right to access education in a free atmosphere, even the right to access health services. So women globally are suffering a lot of injustice. And within the 2030 agenda, we had endeavored to put a whole goal on women advancement. And this builds on what we had in the Millennium Declaration. A lot of progress has been made in advancing the women's capabilities to care for themselves and to take care of their families, but a lot more still needs to be done. And as well as a group of landlocked developing countries, we are again alive to the fact that while we do not have women issues within the Vienna Programme of Action, we are signatories to the 2030 agenda, where we have agreed collectively as a group to work on ensuring that women are given the necessary tools, the necessary platform that will make their lives better, as well as the lives of the children and the lives of their families. So goal number 5 on women empowerment is very critical for all of us. And more so the fact that we need women to be able to own themselves, to own their bodies, to own their families, and to own their communities. So that whole goal for me, when I look at it, is about ownership. The women must own themselves, and we must be part and parcel of the community in which we live. We must contribute to important decision making, just as we contribute towards economic activities in the community, although we get very little from our contributions of the economy, from the contributions that we make towards economic emancipation of the communities.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is a privately financed, independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections Television are solely those of the moderator and his guest. Our viewers are invited to check out the website at www.globalconnectionstelevision.com to view previous shows. If you're interested in distributing our shows through PBS, Community Access Television, educational institutions, a website, or any other media outlets, please go to our website for more information. Global Connections Television is provided as a public service at no cost. Today we're looking at the landlocked developing countries and some of the major issues that they're dealing with, such as climate change, health problems, economic development, and several others. My guest today is an expert on this group. My guest today is Her Excellency, the Dr. Mwaba Kasese-Bota. Dr. Kasese-Bota is Zambia's permanent representative to the United Nations, and she is also the chairperson of the Landlocked Developing Countries Group. Your Excellency, we're talking about the landlocked developing countries and some of the issues you're dealing with. And of course, if we think back to the Millennium Development Goals, to stop or reverse the AIDS pandemic was one of those goals. And of course, that comes in under the health goal, under the new Sustainable Development Goals. Now, you are the co-facilitator of a high-level AIDS conference that's going to take place, we haven't done it yet, but it will take place in June. What will the thrust of that conference be about, and what do you hope will come out of it as far as some tangible strategy or recommendations to deal with what is still a crisis? We don't hear as much about AIDS as we did maybe 10 years ago, but it's still a major problem.
Thank you very much, Bill, for that very important question. Indeed, HIV and AIDS is still a challenge to humanity. It is still a problem. the global community, through the Millennium Declaration Agenda and MDG 6 in particular, galvanized a very formidable response which targeted reversing the epidemic by 2015. And with that, with the line that we had as part of the MDGs, we realized that the global community has done a lot. We have had such strong partnerships that have led to institutions that have ensured that we now have very strong health systems that are able to respond to the challenges of the HIV and AIDS epidemic in some regions. However, the response has not been uniform. And where we have witnessed very good responses, like my country, Zambia, and other countries in Southern Africa, which is basically the epicenter of the AIDS epidemic, the response is not where we want it to be. We must acknowledge that a lot of progress has been made, but it's not enough. We must do more. And in realizing that we need to do more, we came up with a very ambitious goal of the 2030 agenda, and that is the goal of ending AIDS by 2030. That is a very ambitious goal. For us to end AIDS by 2030, it means that we have to do everything possible. We have to turn all stones around and ensure that we close up all taps where HIV and AIDS is possibly leaking for us to get to 2030 agenda. We must identify each and every leaking tap. We must close each tap for us to declare the world free of AIDS by 2030. And this year's meeting is very important in the sense that it's the first meeting we are having since the adoption of the 2030 agenda. And we are looking at front-loading investments that will lead to ending AIDS by 2030. I would be very happy if we can end AIDS by 2020. So front-loading investment is not necessarily a bad thing. All we are saying is we need to be on track. There's no room for complacency. We must end AIDS by 2030. HIV and AIDS is a disease of affection. It is a disease of spouses. It is a disease which a mother passes to her children. It is a disease of colleagues, those that are sharing needles. So it is a disease of affection. And that is the case of the disease. But it doesn't have to be a case. We need to make sure that we work on all elements that are going to ensure that we stop the spread of the disease in all these different cohorts. We know that it's a very sensitive issue in some quarters, but at the end of the day, we are committed to ending AIDS by 2030. And we will not end AIDS by leaving some people behind. We have already agreed in the 2030 agenda that we will leave no one behind. So we have to carry everybody with us. This year's high-level meeting is about access to access to HIV/AIDS treatment, prevention, as well as the supportive measures, which will lead us to 2030 agenda of without HIV and AIDS. It's also about access to drugs. We want to have drugs that will be closer to where the epidemic is, so that we reduce on the cost of transportation of these drugs from the parts of the country where they are manufactured to the parts where the disease is. So we are looking at a lot of progressive lines within the political declaration, which our heads of state and global political leadership is going to affirm when we have the meeting in June, from the 8th of June to the 10th of June. We are very positive that we are on track to ending AIDS, and I'm hopeful that the member states are going to give us a bold language. They're going to give us a language that will lead us to ending AIDS by 2030. And the member states are going to ensure that in that declaration that we have, we do not leave anyone behind. Each and every individual with HIV and AIDS is more than a statistic. They are individuals, and we have to carry them with us to ending AIDS by 2030.
That's exactly right. And as you were going through that, I was thinking about how many of these problems we're dealing with today are manageable. We can eliminate AIDS. We can have universal primary school education. We can do certain things as a matter of the political will and the financial and technical resources brought to bear to deal with these problems. And of course, the problems we've been talking about today, many you're dealing with in Zambia, and our viewers can go to zambiaun.com to get more information about what's going on in your country, or they can always Google Zambia. That's not a problem. This has been a fascinating discussion, Your Excellency, and it's been delightful to hear the really great things that are going on in the South, in the developing countries, and to talk about some of the positive things that have happened. And of course, there are so many other things we could talk about today if we only had a little more time, like Population and Development Commission, the 49th, of which you were also the chair of that, and you've been very actively involved in a wide range of activities at the United Nations and outside of the United Nations also. But it's really been fascinating to talk with you about this. But Ambassador Kasese-Bota, I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you very much, Bill.
It's
really appreciate the time.
My pleasure. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed today's program. Please join us again for the next episode of Global Connections Television. I'm Bill Miller. Thanks for watching.